Okay, we're COMP1050 Animation 2D Tools, and this is week 3, part 1. And what we're going to be talking about for the first part is creative or interaction with ActionScript to create some navigational effects. All right, so let's take a look at this. So we've already learned how to do symbols in Flash, right? We did that a couple weeks ago. And today we're going to kind of focus more on the button symbol, what the button symbol looks like, how it works on the timeline. We're going to try and add a couple of sound effects to the timeline as well, and to the button. Some simple stuff. We're going to learn to write our first ActionScript program, because in order for you to wire a button to work, right, you've got to wire it with ActionScript, right? That's the language of Flash. And you'll see, for those people who were here earlier with me in the morning session, well, 11 o'clock being morning, then you'll see the similarities between ActionScript and JavaScript. JavaScript and ActionScript very, very similar. We're going to talk about the code snippets panel. We're going to look at frame labels, which is a really cool way of doing, kind of moving along the timeline. Instead of using absolute frame numbers, you can use relative frame labels to move along the timeline. And creating animated buttons in this lesson. Then we're going to do another one with text the next lesson. Okay, so getting started, what we want to do is we want to open up 06start.fla. So follow me along. Again, this second half, when we do Flash, the only way you're going to learn Flash to do it right is to follow along with me. So if you're working on something else, for now, I recommend stop working on what you're doing. Do this stuff with me, right? And then, and that's cool, Amy, I like it. But that way, what you want to try and do is stick with me and do the Flash with me as we go, right? Because otherwise, you won't remember. There's just too many little things to do, and this is a doer course, like learning Photoshop or something else. You got to do the work as opposed to watch the work. If you watch the work, you'll never learn. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up in Flash. We're going to go to Open. First, I'm going to close this one off. I'm going to open up under the code archive. We're going to go to the 06start.fla file, which is going to pull up this little restaurant guide. God, I love restaurants because I'm a Greek guy. So I deal with restaurant people all the time. In fact, half my clients, I would say, if not more, are restaurant clients, right? What we might do in the web class is we might create a little restaurant site. We might do a little bit of that in this class as well. So let's go down to see the actual site. This is the size of our canvas. It's 955 by 537 starting off, this start.fla. I mean, what we want to do as soon as we pick these exercise files up is we want to save as 06 working copy. Now, I've already have a 06 working copy, so I'm just going to call it 06 no underscore. You guys can call it whatever you like. So here's my working copy. The other thing you want to try and do is you want to try and see, kind of fit everything in the window, right? And this kind of excludes the pasteboard. So here's the pasteboard, here's the stage. And if you notice, the layers that we have here are the background layer and the title layer, and right now they're both locked. Okay, we also have quite a few assets in our library panel inside of our library. Okay, tons and tons of assets in here. Okay, let's go back. So that's the first thing. We've kind of taken care of this part. So when they say interactive movies here on this slide, what they're talking about is, remember, what we're creating in Flash is a FLA, a Flash movie, Flash file, right? And what we want to do is add interactivity. Well, the only way you can do that, again, in Flash is by using ActionScript. So, and I like what it says here about buttons being a basic visual indicator. It doesn't matter whether you wire it here in Flash or you do it in JavaScript or you do it in Objective-C. whichever way you wire up a button, it's kind of the same way. You have an asset, the button, which is a visual representation of something that the user can interact with. And then you have the back end, some kind of, when I say wiring, some kind of code that you need to use so that when the button is clicked, an event is generated that you respond to. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing it here or whether you're doing it in Python or like any language, it's pretty much the same. What you're creating is an event listener or an event handler. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is talk about the different states that the buttons have. So a button's a little bit different than the movie clip because a button has 4 states that you're going to get automatically when you create a button. You're going to get an up state, an over state, a down state, and a hit state, right? So your over state is when you hover over, right? Your down state when you're physically pressing the button down, and your hit state is when which part of the button is clickable, if you will, right? So let's add a new button. We're going to choose insert new symbol, and then what we're going to do is we're going to create a new button, and we're going to give it this label, Gable Lawful Button, which is part of the restaurant, the Gable Lawful Restaurant, right? So we're going to select button, and then name the symbol this. Okay, so let's try that. So insert symbol, insert new symbol, and then Gable Awful, Lawful, not awful. Awful is like poo-poo, right? We don't want that. And then the type is button, if you notice, right? And then press OK. When we do that, it kind of creates, we're in button editing mode or symbol editing mode now. Okay, that's why the white screen is there and we don't see the stage anymore. And again, top left corner shows us where we are. Scene 1 is the stage, right? And now we can see Gable Lawful, which is the name of the button, right? And it's 1 level in, 1 level deep. We're down 1, okay? And if you notice, there's 1 layer right now in the buttons. It's just the 1 layer has an up state, an over state, a down state, and a hit state. But the only one that we have a keyframe in right now is the up state, and there's nothing in there. Remember, keyframes, to remind you, are the only places we see any changes, right? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the Gable Lawful thumbnail and drag and drop it into the middle of the screen. All right, so we're going to take the thumbnail from the library. So this has already been designed for us. Let's just say from a designer. So they kind of come up and they've kind of taken this information, and I'm just going to drag and drop it in the middle of the screen here. There it is, right? So it looks like almost like this panel. It's quite a big button if you think about it. It has a little picture of the restaurant, the name of the restaurant, and some simple styling. Okay, and right now it's in my up state. That's where it is, right? And so that's the first thing. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to zero it out, because once I've dragged and dropped this button in here, it's not exactly in the 0th location, and that's what I want to do. I want to kind of put it in 0, 0. So the top left corner now is my 0, 0 kind of coordinate, right? Relative to the button itself. If I put it somewhere else, or if I left it there, it wouldn't necessarily be centered when I drag and drop it onto the screen. Okay. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we want to select the hit frame, right, and then insert a frame there. Now it's not going to insert a keyframe, it's just a frame. So we go insert frame, but what it does is it copies, if you notice, the button into each of these states. So each of the states now have the same image copied across all of them, just like any object in a timeline. This is the object, this button's internal timeline. Remember, there's the external timeline, the main timeline, and this is the object, this symbol, internal timeline. Okay, we're going to enter a new layer, and we're going to create select the overframe, and then choose insert keyframe. We're going to insert the keyframe. Okay, we're going to do that in the over state. Okay, so again, new layer. I've adjusted. I've clicked this in the bottom left-hand corner. There's a little new layer button. I'm going to click that. Here it is. I'm going to go to my over button, just like it shows here, and I'm going to actually select the frame itself. You have to do that first. Then right-click, and I'm going to go Insert Keyframe. And now I've got a keyframe for the over state. That's the over state. Okay. And that's in the next layer, right? Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the library panel, and I'm going to drag in this almost like this restaurant info that's going to go onto the stage itself. All right, so the button itself, when you hover over it, it's going to give you a little bit of info. So you go to restaurant previews, right? The same name, Gabble Lawful over info, and I'm going to drag it onto the stage. Now where it's supposed to go, kind of going to hover right over here. So I'm going to kind of position it by eye right now, but later on it's going to be positioned exactly. Right? Now if you notice, there's a bit of a transparency in here so you can actually see the background. So think about this. When you hover over it, this little thing pops up in the over state. That's what's going to happen. Okay, if it's not perfect, don't worry about it for now. Okay, we're going to set this to 0. X is equal to 0 and Y is equal to 215 just to make sure it's in the right location. So X is equal to 0, so mine was almost perfect. 0 and 215. So it's going to put it in the right location, right? Position that properly. Now we're going to put another layer in there, and we're going to go to the down state and insert a keyframe. Right? So we're going to go, we're on layer 2 now. I'm going to insert another layer. There we are. We're going to go to the down state, insert a keyframe. Okay, so we get another keyframe up here in the down state. All right. And what we're going to do is on the down frame, when we click the down button, right, we want to insert a sound in there, right? So we're going to go into the library, and we're going to find this sound called Click Sound MP3, and we're going to drag it onto the stage. Now, you can't see anything, but as soon as you drag this MP3 onto the stage, it actually attaches itself to the button. And here it is, right here. Okay, so we're right here. Touch the click sound onto the stage. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we got to make sure that the down keyframe, right, in the properties inspector, we have to make sure that the sync option is set to event. So we're going to the properties, right, and we're on the down keyframe. And if you notice on the right hand side here under sound, there is a sync option. It's got to be set to event. There's also other ones, start, stop, and stream, and so on. We need the event to be set. Okay, so far so good. Now we're going to go back to the stage and see the scene 1. So here we are. Go back to the stage, and here we are in scene 1, and we've created our first button. And if you look at the library, right, and if I just minimize all these items here, I've got the Gabble Lawful button. Right, there it is. Well, we're going to need to create all the other 4, right? The other 3 buttons. So we're going to kind of do the same thing for the other ones in a second. So again, let's talk about the hit keyframe before we do that. So the hit keyframe is the area that's hot, almost like a hotspot on those old web design maps that we used to use. Remember hotspots way back in the day? Maybe you guys are too young for that. Anyways, it's kind of the same thing. It's like that area where if we're playing a video game, it's the place where the sprite it's going to be hit. So it's almost like the border area of the sprite. Anything that's in that border area is the place where it can be hit. You can change the size of your hit area to be different than the button itself. You can make it bigger, smaller, whatever, depending on what effect you want. Okay. You can also create invisible buttons, like buttons that if you hover over them, they do a certain thing. Like if you hover over a certain area, imagine a stage, and the whole stage is a bunch of buttons, aka tiles, right? And you hover over these buttons, and then they do certain things, but they're all invisible, right? So the tiles themselves, they look the same. When you hover over a piece of the stage, it does something, responds to you. Okay, so we've created one button. Now we're going to create a bunch more. What we're going to do in this particular case is we're going to duplicate the button. So we're going to right-click onto this button in the library and click Duplicate. Okay, and instead of keeping the same name for the label, we're going to change it to the next restaurant name. So let me just go back and highlight the different restaurants so we know what they are. So one of them is called Gary Gary. Another one's called Il Piatto. And the third one is Pierre Platters, right? So we're going to duplicate this label, duplicate this button, and the next one we're going to choose is Gary Gary, right? Gary Gary, there it is, and we're going to press OK. So there's the next button, and we can do that again. Duplicate, and instead of Gary Gary, now it's going to be Il Piatto, and we're going to do it again. Right-click, duplicate, And instead of Il Piatto, it's going to be Pierre Platters. Okay, so we've got 4 buttons now. 1, 2, 3, 4, but they all have the same graphics, right? You guys with me? All we've done is we've duplicated the buttons over and over again. Okay. Now what we want to do is we want to swap out the bitmap, right? We've got one bitmap. We got to swap out 2 things. We've got to swap out the actual bitmap for the button, and we also got to swap out the info for the button, because the button itself has a structure. We want to keep that structure, the spacing, and all that stuff. We want to swap out the bitmap, the stuff that's being used there, so that it's applicable. The other thing we're going to do is for myself, I didn't name them properly. I should really name them Gable Lawful Button, just to be contextual. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing it here, you're working in Flash, or whether you're working in another language. You should always try and make your objects as contextual as possible. There's other things I probably would have done here too if I wasn't working along this tutorial, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, so we got the buttons. I'm going to open up Gary now, and I'm going to double click onto the actual image of the button itself. It'll take me into button editing mode. Here it is. I'm going to go to Properties and click on the actual object itself, the first layer of the object, right here. Okay. So I've got the actual image, the bitmap that I'm looking at right now. It's the bottom layer where it says the upstate, right? And I'm going to hit I'm in the Properties panel, and I'm going to hit Swap, right? I'm going to swap out the bitmap. And remember, this one is the Gary button, so I've got to swap out this one for the Gary thumbnail. So now I've done that. I've switched it up. Okay. I've got to do that. And the other thing I got to do is I got to change up this overlayer, this info. I got to swap that out too. So I got to click on that, and instead of get out your Lederhosen for Gary, it's going to say something else, right? So I got to click swap, and now I'm going to go to the Gary over info and click that. So now that changes the words there for something else. So now I've got my completed button for Gary. Okay, I'm going to go back to scene, go back to the library, and do it again for Il Piatto. And I'll let you guys do that to make all the duplications and the changes. And I'll check back with you in a second while I'm doing mine. Okay, so I'm here in the bottom layer. Okay, I'm going to Properties, Swap. Now I'm going to go to Il Piatto, because that's the one I'm looking at. Here's the thumbnail. Right, here's the overstate. Click onto it. Right, swap it out with previews. Close it up. And the last one, Pierre Platters, double click, go into it, Properties, swap it out, Pierre Platters, press OK. Go to the over info, click onto it, swap it out, and we're done. Okay, at this point I'm going to save because I don't want anything bad happening to my file. So I'm going to save my file. I've got all my buttons. You guys with me? It should be that quick. You got one button, you duplicate it, you swap out the bitmaps if it's exactly the same. In this particular case it is. There's other things you can do, obviously. Sometimes your buttons aren't as the same as these ones are. But so it's easy for us to do what we did. But we've got to do that work first, and then you save. Whenever you come to a milestone, save your work. Okay. So I've done all this. We've swapped out all the bitmaps. We kept doing that, and now we're going to place the buttons onto the stage. So what we want to do, we want to create a new layer called buttons on the stage. So we're going to go to the stage, we're going to click on the top title layer and create a new layer called buttons. We'll just change the name, there it is. And now what we're going to do is we're going to copy the buttons like this, in the same order. Gable Lawful, Gary, Il Piatto, and Pierre Platters. So let's put all that down there, just like that. So I'm just going to drag and drop these from the library. So Gable Lawful, and I'm just going to place them as best I can right now, and we'll be more specific very shortly. And if you notice when I place them down here, as I do that, there's these smart guides that come down, right? To kind of try and align them with the other buttons, the ones that have already been created. There's one, as an example. Here's that smart guide, right? It's going to try and do that. You can also select everything on the stage by just hovering across and selecting all, right? And now I can move the whole set of buttons to the left or wherever I want them, somewhere in the middle. Okay? But they're not quite even yet. All right. So now that I've got them on the stage, I've got to align them, right? So the first button, the one on the top, on the left, X is going to be 100 and Y is going to be 680. We're going to align everything to that. All right. So first button, X is 100. Y, what did I say? Oh, no, leave X the way it is. The last button is X is equal to 680. So almost pretty close. All right, there we are. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go Window, and we're going to align horizontally. So everything is on the same line. So we're going to click this one, and we're going to click one after the other to the last one, and then we're going to use our align, and we're going to align them so that they're all lined up with the first one. So we're going to align to top edge, because now they're all lined up correctly, right? 680, they're all kind of lined up the same. Now we're going to kind of create space between them all. That's the first thing. Now with the first button selected again, or sorry, with all the buttons selected, we're going to go to, let's just align them all. We're going to go to Properties, and we're going to go to Y equals 170, so slightly down from where I was. Okay, that's cool. So they're all aligned to 170. What we need to also do is we need to align them so that they're all spaced out evenly, right? Oops. Kind of skipped ahead there for somehow. So I can select the first button and then the other buttons after it and go into my align, and then I want to kind of space it out. I want to distribute evenly. Now I can distribute horizontally to the center, right? There it is. So now they're all distributed evenly. Okay, so they're all nicely distributed. I'm going to save my work. I got the buttons on the stage. I distributed them evenly. I saved my work. Okay, next. Now that they're all aligned, right? I want to test my movie so you can see how the buttons work. All right, so go back, Command Enter on the Mac, Control Enter on the PC, and now I have my movie. And if I hover over, I get the hover states. But really, they don't do anything yet because we haven't wired them up, like we talked about. Who's at this stage with me? Everyone made it? It's pretty quick, right? All we're doing is creating a button and some hover states, some overstates. Right? That's all they do. And when you click, you should hear that sound. You hear it? That's me doing that. Okay? Don't click too much or else you get everyone in trouble, right? Okay, the buttons are created. Next, we have to wire them up. How to do this? Okay, we got a name. In order for us to wire up all the buttons, right, or to connect them to ActionScript, we need to name them all, right? So we're going to go to the first button, and we're going to label it inside the label area itself in Properties, Gable Lawful _ button. Now again, they're using the underscore as the convention here. So I'm clicking the first button, right, and here's my instance name right here at the top. So it's Gable Lawful. I'll be okay. I believe it's, I don't know if it's one word. Did we do one word? Yeah, Gable Lawful. Okay, let's try that again. Don't worry, you can always rename the, hello. We can always rename the instance again. _button. Gable Lawful _ button. And the same thing goes for Gary, Il Piatto, and Pierre Platters. So Gary _ button. Gary _ button. Il Piatto _ button, or BTN, so to speak. And Pierre Platters _BTN. Okay, so we've done it all. Let's check and make sure they're correct. There it is, instance of, instance of, instance of. These are all instances of these buttons. And now I'm going to save my work. I save regularly because, you know, I'm a nervous kind of guy. I don't like losing my work. All right. So now that we've done all that, we've got all the buttons labeled correctly. In order for you to use your buttons, you need to create instance names for them. If you do not, they are objects floating in free space that you cannot access in any way, right? They're just objects, right? You want to be able to access them, and this is why we're naming them. Okay, we're going to lock the layers now. Okay, so we're going to lock all the layers. This is where it is, and now they're going to talk about naming rules. We just kind of went over that this morning, but I'll say it again. Whether it's an action script or in JavaScript, the names have to be contextual, please, when you're making your objects. Okay, that's the first thing. So when I look at your documents that you're going to be handing in for your flash ad, right, your banner ad, I want the names to make sense, and your layers, and the buttons, your library has to make sense. Okay. Instance names are not the same as the symbol names in the library. Okay, it doesn't matter. You can name your library, the object of your library, and your symbol name the exact same. It doesn't matter because the library is just a collection of objects, and we're just creating some names from an organizational perspective, but they have no value from a programming perspective. Okay, they're just symbols. That's all they are. Okay. All instance names are case sensitive, just like in JavaScript. For ActionScript is the same. Okay, do not use spaces or special punctuation. Underscores are okay to use, and don't begin with a number, just like we didn't do in JavaScript. Okay, let's talk about ActionScript a little bit. Actually, let's go back. Up until there, I'm going to pause the movie and restart it.